Hey everyone! I'm Albert Boris. And guess what? April is finally over, meaning we're only a little over a month away from the release of Mario Kart World now. Man, it's kinda hard to believe how fast time has flown by. I still remember back when it was first teased back in the January Switch 2 teaser. And while I'm only growing more excited as we're closing in on the release date, there's certainly concerns to be had, but on the whole I'm confident that I'm gonna enjoy the gameplay more than anything before in Mario Kart. What I'm a little more conflicted on though is the character selection. I've briefly touched on this topic previously on the channel, and at first I thought the sheer wackiness of it was a pleasant surprise, but now that the roster has had its time to really sink into me, and the Mario Kart World Direct didn't confirm any characters beyond this, I realized that I'm not really as happy as I want to be about this. And in fact, I even talked about this in my Discord server, Greenpipe City, a while back too, and it seems that a lot of my friends agree as well to a lesser extent. It's not that I think the roster looks awful, far from it. There's certainly still aspects I like about it, and in its own way, it's definitely kind of endearing, how random some of these choices are. But I definitely feel like it could be better, and a part of me also feels that it's more lazy than creative. Which is why today I wanted to go through all of the confirmed characters and give my thoughts on them, which ones I think are worthy additions, and which ones feel like they robbed potentially more deserving characters, as well as just my general feelings on the roster as a whole. So with all that being said, let's just get right into it. Okay, so first off, before we talk about the characters, I think it's only fair that I first bring up what I believe constitutes a good character pick. In my opinion, that is. This obviously changes from person to person, but for me, the most important thing is that they anatomically make sense to be able to drive. In other words, do they have visible arms? Legs I don't mind as much if they don't have, because for the most part, if they're in a cart, I'm usually not gonna see them anyways. But even if a character doesn't have arms, I can still be okay if to compensate, the characters use something else to steer the cart instead with. For example, if something like Chain Jump just used their mouth, since not only would it make it at least somewhat believable, but it would also be a creative use of the character's physical traits. Secondly, I also believe that more often than not, it's better to focus on drivers that, you know, are actual characters, rather than just random enemies. Not always, but most of the time. Obviously, we still need some enemy characters, and again, if they anatomically make sense to be in a cart, I'm okay with it, as long as there's a balance. And actually, if the idea is so off the charts insane, I can even be okay with a character that doesn't make sense, as long as there's not too much of them. And preferably, established characters is what I'd like to first and foremost focus on. Especially if they're from previous Mario games and haven't had any time to shine elsewhere. So as an example, I'd be okay with Ninja and Poplins, or Luba and Egad, but I'd be less happy about Bob-Ombs or Flood. And yeah, I know my Bing Bing Woohoo racing game doesn't have to be realistic, but hey, I like to have some semblance of realism still. Especially when the game is gonna feel as immersive as this one will. But now that yap session is out of the way, now let's actually take a look at the roster. So, when it comes to the returning drivers, I admittedly have little to nothing to complain about. There's around 30 characters in this department, and for the most part, I think they did a decently great job of picking out the most relevant and interesting choices. It's nice to see that Pauline is finally a mainstay, and obviously as a Birdo fanatic, I'm always gonna be happy to see her, and I'm relieved that Bowser Jr., Drybones, King Boo, and Wiggler kept their spots from 8 Deluxe. Especially Wiggler, he's always kind of been the perfect curveball character to me, since his design is wacky, but he still worked around it so that he can drive a vehicle. And he even has his own angry animation where he turns red, making him an even more unique character to play as. So yeah. We even got several newcomers from Tor, like Hammerbro, Chardenchuck, and Nabbit. Characters I'm surprised weren't drivable before, but the fact that they finally are now puts a huge smile on my face. Monty Mole is the only character I'm not entirely okay with here, because even though he has the anatomy for a kart driver, he's also just kinda boring design-wise. At least to me. I'd rather have a more unique looking enemy take his place instead. Although again, since he was in Tor, and even two of the newer Mario parties, he's not outright offensive. Oh yeah, and Baby Rosalina sucks, but that was obvious already. Imagine if we're also getting Baby Pauline. However, when it comes to the new characters, things are admittedly looking quite a bit shaky. Is it funny on one hand? Yes, that I'll admit. When I first saw these in the April Direct trailer, I was so flabbergasted by how obscure these picks were that I couldn't help but laugh alongside with it. However, while they may be funny now, that's also mostly just from the shock of seeing them playable. Once the game has been out for a few months, the shock will wear off, and they're just gonna look weird. Already, Goomba is someone I've never really enjoyed seeing playable in Mario games. I didn't like them as a choice in Mario Party, so naturally, I'm not exactly stoked to see them here either. And it's not just because he has no arms, but it's also just so generic on top of that. He's way smaller than any other Mario character, so much so that they're usually just used as easy hazards when there's nothing better to put on the road. So to see them in a cart now, I don't know, it just feels a bit wrong. Regardless, I'm not going to be as harsh on him as with some other guys on the list, because he's still very iconic to the franchise, being the first thing you see in Super Mario Bros, so I guess I can kinda see why he's playable, even if I'm never gonna use him at all. And on the other hand, even though he's armless, they could have just made him use his feet to steer the wheel instead, which would still make him somewhat original, but they didn't. So missed potential, I guess. Piranha Plant is in a bit of a similar predicament, where it's another classic but generic Mario enemy, but the fact that his plant leaves already almost look like arms makes me a bit more hopeful that it's gonna be more naturally incorporated. So yeah, this one I might be fine with, depending on how it's gonna look once I see gameplay. And the next two characters are probably some of the best newcomers we could have gotten in this game, Spike and Pianta. See, these are kind of what encapsulate what I like in new drivers. They both have proper arms and legs, and design-wise, they're a lot more unique than our average Goombas or moles, with Pianta also referencing the underrated Mario Sunshine, and Spike being a slightly more uncommon enemy in the franchise. Now for dolphins, I mean, on one hand, dolphins are my favorite animal, specifically the archetype, and the fact that you can use the dolphin on the Dolphin Dasher is gonna open up a lot of meme potential, but why is he just levitating? We haven't seen how he sits in karts yet, so maybe it's gonna be more aesthetically pleasing there, but yeah, this character feels like they just added it for the fun, without taking into consideration if it would look good. Maybe it will look better once the game releases, but not the best choice. Moo on the other hand though, oh wait, sorry, cow. Is another example of a great curveball. Sure, it looks a bit uncanny, but the anatomy actually makes somewhat sense at least. Plus, she's already a somewhat established species in Mario Kart, having made an appearance in 4 separate games at this point. So this species definitely has a bit of a cult status, and so in a way, it feels much more deserved than some other picks on the list. No complaints at all. And I guess penguins are fine too, because while they're kinda basic looking, they definitely have their place in the Mario series, and again, they make sense to be able to drive. From here on out, now begins the true downward spiral though. Parabitibug pretty much has all the attributes of the Goomba, but without the positives. He's a generic enemy, but unlike him, he also doesn't have the same cultural relevancy, and he doesn't use his legs to drive either. Again, this seems more like just another meme choice, because Parabitibug on the Buggybud is funny. Which I guess it is, but come on. What's next? We're gonna get a teddy bear character just because there's a cart of it? Or a flame runner character? Wait. But yeah, while there's some meme potential for the Parabitibug, what exactly is the poke supposed to be for? He's yet another basic enemy, and he's got an even more basic design as it's just 3 spiky balls on top of each other. Nintendo, why? I'm all for joy and whimsy, but he's got neither the legs or the arms. Don't you think this is getting a bit ridiculous? At least it has a somewhat cool trick animation, but I don't know. And Snowman is basically just that, but even more basic and forgettable. Oh hey, instead of 3 balls, now it's just 2 of them. And I mean, at least Pokés are numerous new Super Mario Bros. Games, so they have plenty of relevancy. Snowmen are just snowmen. What about them by themselves make them relevant to Mario? Could we not at least have had like Mr. Blizzard? No, that would have been an established character at least, but whatever. And Sidestepper? Out of all new additions we could have gotten in this game, this is not only the most random, but probably the laziest too. It's already generic looking as it is, being just a crab. But then they couldn't even be bothered to give him animations, so most of the time he's just completely static in place. This is not funny, it's boring. And you know what's also boring? Swoop. It's just any typical bat. At this point, I'd be more happy if we got like a Golbat or Crobat from Pokemon instead. Stingby, I can kind of see where the funny argument comes from, he's a bit of a flying fluff ball. But not enough that once again his anatomy doesn't make sense for this, but we have Honey Queen already, and while I'd prefer she stays in 7 to make that game more unique, even she would have been better than this. And there's not even as much meme potential with this guy, because while there is a bee cart, it's more so just bee themed, rather than directly looking like one, so thanks for nothing. Now Cataquack, hold up. This is actually kind of fire. Yeah, I'm gonna let this one slide, because even though the anatomy makes no sense at all, this is the kind of off-the-charts wacky I talked about, which I'm okay with. It's so random and completely out of place, and it's probably only here because it's already on Peach Beach, but honestly, it's kind of endearing. It's pretty rare by Mario enemy standards, having only appeared in said course, Super Mario Sunshine and 1 mission of Mario Galaxy previously, and the design is pretty creative compared to something like Snowman. Do I still think he's great? No, maybe not, but in the sea of rather boring picks, he stands out greater. And to a lesser extent, I guess Fishbones does too. This one I'm gonna be a bit more harsh on, because on one hand, it's not only redundant with Cheep Cheep and Dry Bones already, but it's got no arms and legs, in addition to just looking too small and slim. Like, I'm pretty sure that when I'm gonna drive as this character, I'm half the time not even gonna notice that it's there, and that's a pretty big problem. Like, this is definitely more of just hazard material. But again, I kind of have to applaud how out of the blue this idea is, which is why I don't hate him. Pepe though is boring. It's redundant with King Boo, but unlike him, they're an enemy and a very generic looking one at that. I genuinely don't see the charm here at all. And same can be said for Rocky Wrench. At first glance, he just looks like a reskinned Monty Mole, but with more equipment, and I already thought Monty Mole was a boring choice. Thankfully, Rocky Wrench has had a bit of a redesign since a few years back, so it's not just a new coat of paint anymore, but again, it's kinda meh in my opinion. And Cheep Cheeps... Okay, let's just get this straight. In a nutshell, this is pretty much just an underwater Goomba, in that it's incredibly iconic, but incredibly unfitting as a driver. I love Cheep Cheeps personally, they're adorable little idiots. But for goodness sake, they're better off as hazards with how small their sizes are. They can't even use their fins to steer because they're locked to always stay backwards. At least fish bones are so insane that it becomes kind of funny. And I'm not even against having marine animals racing. They had Blooper! That would have made way more sense while still being a curveball. And lastly, we have Coin Coffer and Conkdor. And, okay, these ones are also going to be marked off as exceptions, despite their drawbacks. Like with the Cataquacks, these are some of the more obscure and deep-cut Mara enemies in the series, with not too many appearances, so even without arms, seeing them get representation here does make me a bit happy at least. Especially since their designs are pretty creative. On the one hand, Conkdor looks a bit tall, potentially blocking my view, but it also actually looks really fun in my opinion. Plus it's so slim that I don't think it will be an issue. And for Coin Coffer, I don't just love it because I love green. I do, but come on, who could have even expected this? It's so random that it loops back to being great for me. But yeah, that's all the newcomers that have been properly unveiled, and I hope you can see to a lesser extent where my issues with them lie now. Way too many of them are just basic generic enemies, a lot of which shouldn't even be allowed anywhere near a car, and once you look at them together, it also becomes obvious where the deeper problem is too. Because all of them are just regular hazards already found on the racetracks. There's nothing beyond that. Is that out of laziness? Well, maybe, especially since some of them don't look to fit on a cart at all. Or is this just a small part of a bigger picture? Well, I guess that's possible too. One way which I could personally see them being justified is if there's perhaps a fun way to unlock them, related to the tracks they reside in. Imagine this, maybe if you went to Peach Beach in free roam mode and talk to the Cataquacks there, you could maybe do some sort of mission, and once you beat them, you'd unlock them as a playable character. It wouldn't make these drivers that much better, but at least there would be a justification, and they'd be incorporated into the game in a fun way. However, the biggest issue with this, as I stated earlier in the video, is that it doesn't seem like we're gonna get any more characters outside of this. At first, I was lightly hopeful that this wasn't all of it, but once the Mario Kart World Direct didn't show off anyone else, I think it's safe to assume that this is it. Especially with how notoriously bad the Nintendo is at keeping secrets for us now. Because even with as many issues as I do have with these NPC drivers, all of it would be so much more trivial if they didn't replace already established characters. Because there is surprisingly a lot of veterans missing. I can see why some characters like Petey Piranha or Funky Kong or Honey Queen didn't make it in, as they're a little more niche, but come on. What about Diddy Kong, Mies, or Kamek? Seriously, the fact that Kamek is an item now should not have an effect on whether or not he could be playable, because they could have just given us a regular Magic Koopa driver to compensate instead, but I guess not. And that's not to mention the plethora of brand new characters we could have gotten too, like Cappy, Pom Pom, Egad, Ninjib, the Brutals. Heck, as unrealistic as it would have been, what if we could have gotten some RPG characters at last too? The point is, there's so many other established characters that deserve to be playable too, and while we obviously couldn't get all of them, not even just getting a few of them is incredibly disappointing. As long as we had a few of these kinds of characters too, I wouldn't have cared how unrealistic the actual newcomers we got were, because they just feel like a nice bonus in that case. It's all about balance, and this roster really screwed that up. And sure, maybe there's a few more characters we haven't seen yet, but I wouldn't count on it. Although, on another hand, that just gave me another video idea. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say for this video, and with that, that also wraps up Albert Boris April for this year. Man, this was a productive month on my side for the channel. Now, with all things said and done, I definitely don't dislike this roster. I certainly think it looks flawed, but even with its numerous setbacks, I'm holding my thumbs up that this roster will be a fun part of the game nevertheless. And hopefully, maybe some of the characters like the Sidestepper and Dolphin get more expressive on release. After all, what we saw in the trailers might have just been from an early unfinished version of the game. I was a bit skeptical on whether or not I was going to do this video at first, since this title might have looked a bit hypocritical from what I said previously, but hopefully you all enjoyed this short little discussion video. But what is your opinion on the roster in Mario Kart World? Did you agree with me or not? If you liked this video, then make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel, as I make videos on everything Mario related. And follow me on my Discord server, Green Pipe City, as well as on Patreon and Twitter for more updates, and I'll see you all soon. Until next time.